Our first speaker is Thea Selby. She has been with us since the beginning. She is now on the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board, which we're proud to have that you're on there. She's a principal at Next Steps Marketing, a digital and call-to-action marketing firm based in San Francisco, working primarily with media, nonprofit, and high-tech clients. She was appointed to the California High-Speed Rail Authority Board in March of 2014 and was elected vice chair of the Authority Board in June of 2015. She was elected to the City College of San Francisco Board of Trustees in November 14. It's the largest community college in California. And she also serves as chair of the San Francisco Transit Riders, an organization that successfully conducted the the 22nd day Muni Challenge campaign in June of 2015, where the mayor and all 11 county supervisors pledged to ride Muni and to tweet with the hashtag #OnBoardSF. So with that, please welcome Thea Selby, who has a lot of good background in both high-speed rail and in marketing, and as a way to really put this together.
Hi, everybody. There's a bright light there. Does that stay? Okay, all right. So thank you for that wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it. And I am going to be relatively brief. I just wanted to say a couple of things that I've learned and really talk not so much big picture as little picture. These are some of the things that I've learned in the last year and 3/4 that I've been on the board that I thought I would pass your way. Let's see if I can figure out this clicker. There we go. Anybody know what article this might be? I understand the gentleman who wrote it was in the audience a little earlier, maybe today. His name is, I think, Mr. Vardabakian. Am I saying that close? Vardabakian, okay. A good Armenian name. And he trashed high-speed rail beautifully, as he almost always does. What he said is essentially we're going to hell in a handbasket. You have an 80 to 90% probability of a cost overrun. Research finds that high-speed rail projects are 45 to 100% increase their costs over time. Basically, we have nothing but early setbacks, and the odds are stacked against it, and you can never make up an early cost increase. So this is from the article that he wrote there, essentially claiming that we were going to have huge cost overruns. The reality, however, is something very different. The reality is that we've had 2 bids come in. The first one came in $200 million. For those of you, I'm sure Jeff Morales went through this, so I'm not going to. This is not the only thing I'm going to talk about, but I do think it's worth saying again is that the first bid for the construction project number 1 came in $200 million plus under budget, the estimate for it, and the second CP23 came in almost, it was 400,000, almost close to $500 million, million dollars under what the estimate could have been. So far, score 0 LA Times for accuracy. The other thing he said to me is almost even more upsetting. This is at the beginning of the article, and I was just talking to Andy about how it's striking to me that he has this wonderful video about how Californians are full of grit and that we can overcome anything. And I want you to see if Mr. Vardabakian is in that same vein. He says, the monumental task of building California's bullet train will require punching 36 miles of tunnels through the geologically complex mountains north of Los Angeles. Crews will have to cross the tectonic boundary that separates the North American and Pacific plates. Does this sound like a man who can do anything? Boring through a jumble of fractured rock formations and a maze of earthquake faults, some of which are not mapped. I actually think he's quite a writer. I think this is beautifully written. And how it makes me feel is, hell yeah, we can do it. You know, I don't think that was his intention at all. I think his intention was to say to us, this is impossible. We couldn't possibly, make a tunnels. I think Jeff maybe alluded to tunnels. In reality, and I took this straight from Mr. Morales, the CEO of California High-Speed Rail, Japan, the world expert in high-speed rail, is working on tunneling under the ocean from island to island as we speak. So there are tunnels. There are lots of tunnels. We can do tunnels. Tunnels are us. So why is the LA Times doing this? This is sort of what I want to focus on. Why do we have this, what at least used to be, and I know I'm in Los Angeles, so I should be careful. I was a huge fan of the Los Angeles Times. I come from media, by the way. I mean, I should have started there. My very first job after getting an MBA was at the Prague Post in the Czech Republic, and my brother is a journalist, and my mother worked in newspapers. So I have a huge positive feeling about particularly newspapers and magazines, and I loved the LA Times. The LA Times was I used to say it was the paper of record because New York Times was like in the wrong place, It wasn't on our coast. So I have a huge respect for the LA Times, but I think what he's trying to do here is certainly instill fear in the public and in politicians, and he succeeded beautifully. He appears to be looking for the gotcha, and by the way, I don't know this man, and this isn't a personal attack at all. This is just an analysis of why this is an example of why we get this kind of journalism here in California. I'm not trying to attack this gentleman in particular, although he's particularly good at it. He's doing it because he wants to wield influence. He wants to show that he is on top of it and that he has this opinion that we all should hold clearly. And I'm from, I get people's subscriptions for a living. That's what I do. He wants to increase readership. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind he wants to increase readership. So these are just to give you the different reasons why somebody like an esteemed columnist for the Los Angeles Times, which I understand is a little bit different than it used to be, but why would he be spending so much time and effort pillaring probably the most exciting project going on in America today, if not, an even larger thing. So now I'm just going to bring up a couple of points that might help us to overcome this kind of urge that seems to be amongst journalists. And one thing is to find fact-friendly media. So full disclosure, my brother works for PolitiFact Texas, so he's not a part of PolitiFact California, but he was the one who told me that PolitiFact had come to California, and I was excited about this. I don't know if you guys know, it's a very simple principle. It's the idea that, if they actually research what people say, particularly politicians, and if the politician, and then they sort of judge it mostly true, mostly false, and then if it's really bad, it goes to pants on fire. So Trump probably gets quite a few pants on fires from the Washington PolitiFact. And this gentleman, as we know, is a Californian, and he said, we now know these firms are unwilling to put up any private money for California's high-speed rail project. And he said this because we had done a request for an expression of interest from, and I'm sure Jeff talked about this yesterday, so I won't go into it too much, but we did have at least 16 extremely interesting and exciting responses, 35 all told, but 16 that had all sorts of innovative ideas, and it was, I think, a very good idea to do this. We didn't do this to find our next partner. We did this to plumb the intelligence and the expertise of all of the people who are doing high-speed rail all over the world, because let's face it, we don't do high-speed rail in America. So that's why we did it, and we got this information back. And thank you, PolitiFact, for actually delving into the statement and coming back with, no, that is mostly false. In another case, there was a question, have costs dropped several $100 million for California's bullet train? And you can, certainly check out PolitiFact California yourself, but the statement that they were sort of basing this on was one that our CEO, Jeff Morales, had said, that the actual construction contracts that were awarded to date have come in several $100 million below estimates. And as I mentioned earlier, yes, that statement is mostly true. So the beauty of this kind of fact-friendly media, and Dan Richard, who is our chair, when I brought this forward to them because I was so excited because my brother works for the same organization, that finally we had somebody in California who was literally sort of testing these statements that people like Ralph Verdabedian were making, and he said, yes, it's facts. And it is, you could say it's hard to play with facts. People say it is, but I think we have very little fact-friendly media in California, and that's one thing we should be playing to, is our fact-friendly media. On a smaller and more passionate basis, we have California High-Speed Rail blog, which everybody read that on occasion at least? A few people. You should really check it out, because there's lots of intelligent conversation around it. These are advocates in most cases, but they are fact-based, and if we could sort of make that something bigger, I think that would help. The second thing that I think we need to do here in California and anywhere that we're doing high-speed rail is we need to be a little more proactive with what we're doing. And I'm pleased and proud to say that the California High-Speed Rail is starting to do some very simple but I think effective videos, and I would love to play that video now.
Hi, Gilbert.
Hello.
In a business that often is dominated by men, Jacqueline Patterson and her company, J.L. Patterson and Associates, has been blazing a trail in transportation for the last 25 years.
I formed the company with a specific objective of serving the rail industry, so that's all we do.
Born in Nicaragua, Jacqueline fled her home country in 1978 as it was being torn apart by revolution. Just 19 at the time, she finished her civil engineering degree at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. From there, it was off to California to work on a new rail project in Los Angeles.
I came as a junior engineer to that company, working on the first segment of Metro Red Line from Union Station to MacArthur Park.
And while she says she could have continued down that track, opportunity came knocking in the form of programs aimed to help women and minority-owned businesses.
I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, okay, I'm a woman, I'm a Hispanic, I'm very well qualified, let me just try this. And so I jumped with 2 feet.
2 feet and 2 toddlers, a 2.5-year-old son and a 10-month-old daughter. She says it took time to establish herself as a serious player in the rail industry.
There were times way back in, I want to say about 10, 15 years ago, where I will attend a conference, for example, and they will say, no, the spouses are this way. And I said, no, I am an engineer. I am a business owner. I'm here on the conference, not as a spouse. It's been difficult at times, but a lot less now. Much more acceptance as to, a woman-owned business and a Hispanic-owned business than it used to be when I started 25 years ago.
Over those 25 years, J.L. Patterson has grown from just Jacqueline to more than 100 employees in 4 offices spread across the country. And now the company is getting on board the nation's largest transportation program.
The opportunities that high-speed rail is giving us have been immense. It is well known that the majority of the employment come from small companies throughout the states, and we're very happy to be one of those.
J.L. Patterson serves as a subcontractor on 3 different high-speed rail project sections, but it has its sights set on a much larger goal.
We've always been a sub-consultant to high-speed rail. We're looking forward to one opportunity where we can actually prime a section.
The woman who successfully risked starting her own business says high-speed rail is not risky business for California.
It is a system that once it gets here will be used tremendously. I just know it. Is the classic example of that if you build it, they will come.
So that was an example of what I'm guessing, and I haven't talked to Lisa Marie, who's the head of communications at California High-Speed Rail, but there weren't a lot of resources that needed to be put towards that, but it's a great story. It's a small businesswoman who is actually making her company bigger, stronger through high-speed rail. There are a lot of stories out there. We need to get those kinds of stories out. It is going to be, I think, very practical, not so much visionary, because for whatever reason, visionary seems to be things that can be cut down really quickly. But it might be, in our case for California, I think we're at the point. You need visionary at some points. But at this point, we may be at the point of just explaining the good that California High-Speed Rail is doing. The other thing that I am a firm believer in is the third prong of the approach, and that is bottom-up communication, and that's also known as outreach. In this case, I'm talking about a Burlingame on the peninsula. We had an outreach meeting, a community meeting, and this particular article was interesting in that it really set out the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it pretty accurately, I think, represented what the meeting was all about. So, and I've spoken with some of you here at this conference about, I felt like we learned a lot. And we learned a lot partially because the residents insisted through a politician who came to the board and said, you need to do it this way, that there be public comment, and that there be public comment where others could hear. And I think that that was actually very helpful in terms of frankly, building a movement, because honesty is part of building a movement. Really understanding the problems that people have are a part of building a movement. So what are the problems that the residents, and these residents were in Burlingame, California, which is going to be the stretch that Caltrain and High-Speed Rail are going to be sharing from San Jose up to San Francisco. Well, the first concern is traffic, and what they mean by traffic is that there are going to be 20 trains at peak hour that are going to be crossing streets. And the traffic will have to stop, theoretically, 20 times an hour, which even I, a high-speed rail advocate, think is too much. I think that's not going to work. So that was one of the first things that they brought forth, and they brought it forth strongly, clearly, and not half as viciously as they would have in San Francisco, I will say. So that was really great to hear. Noise is another concern, and some of these concerns, I think are more or less real. Terrorism was another concern that was brought up. Accidents, which I'm sure you come up with a lot. Suicides, and this is a very local problem in that they are in a corridor which is near Palo Alto High. And Palo Alto High is full of all of these people whose parents went to Stanford, and they went to Harvard, and they went to Yale, and maybe they, went to Berkeley. And the kids have a lot of pressure on them to try and match up to their parents. And they have chosen, unfortunately, Caltrain as a way to release that pressure permanently, really unfortunately. And so this is a concern that we really have to deal with and sort of look at, pretty honestly of, I'm sure this is an issue for trains all over the world. But in this particular community, that this is something that concerns them quite a bit. There's also in Palo Alto and that whole, a lot of the peninsula, there's a real division of east from west. And east is literally often a different culture. It's often poorer. You will really be on the other side of the train tracks when high-speed rail gets built. So again, this division of east-west, how do we build a high-speed rail train and actually maybe knit the community together rather than having those two communities even further pulled apart? Because it's not to say they're not apart now, they are, but they would be even further pulled apart. And then the one that I think is in some ways the hardest to deal with, and the one that I think we've come up with from the very beginning is the fear of the unknown. And if anyone has any good ideas on how to deal with that, please let me know. I think the other ones are easier than the fear of the unknown because it's a fear, you know. So some of the lessons that I think we learned, I mentioned earlier, the public comment. I think there's a real concern with public agencies. I work also quite a bit with San Francisco Municipal Transit Authority Agency and some other public agencies. And there's a real concern about losing control when you're in a situation and you have the public. And I think that I've come to the opinion, and this is my bottoms up, you know, that we have to have that bottom up communication and this is my last thing, that it's going to be the community itself that gives you the local solutions. So you might as well let them talk, and you might as well give them a forum to talk, and you might as well listen, you know, as opposed to talk, which I think we know that I think that's a best practice even today. And then this is also a best practice. If you know specific answers, give them. People get so frustrated with sort of vague answers, and if you don't, then let people know that you'll get back to them. And then, as I say, give people, your job is to bring them vision. In my opinion, their job is to bring you the challenges and the opportunities of their local area. And so in that very article at the very end, after they had all of these issues and problems, they actually had a quote that's from me, which I was pleased that the ending was that, which is, "The peninsula is in a better position than many areas in California. You've been actively engaged in shaping the direction that high-speed rail is going to go in your area." And by that, in particular, I mean Caltrain electrification. You're kind of the first, and in some ways maybe the furthest along in terms of knowing where things are going, said me. This high-speed rail is not being built in a vacuum. It's not being built by just engineers or by people in Sacramento. It's being built with the input of people across California. So that's something that I feel very strongly, that we're all involved, we're all participating. This is for all of us, and that's a message that I want to try and get across. And the last prong of sort of fighting the vertibadians of this world and the negative press, and perhaps this is the one thing that also will fight the fear of the unknown. And I've seen it to some extent in this very area. This is the Central Valley, and this is me with Doug Drozd, who is one of the staff members at California High-Speed Rail. And in back of us is the beginning of a viaduct that I was at this very spot, and you can see on my Facebook, you know, a year and a half ago, how I photographed all that indicated the beginning of high-speed rail, which was a tiny little red flag that was in the ground. That was it. Well, here's what we've got now. And I do think that as the project progresses, I see it in Fresno. I see it where these people are actually seeing the change. It's not just a matter of talking about it. It's a matter of, I was mentioning at lunch that there's a gentleman who has a very large business in Fresno where he ships out fruit to all over the country, and he ships it out within 24 hours of receiving it in most cases. And he proudly led us through his, I don't know how many square feet, but massive relocated business. And he had to relocate because of high-speed rail, and he had to consolidate what had been several different locations into one massive location. It is I don't know if it's 100% sustainable, but it's much more sustainable and green than it was before. Everything is state-of-the-art. He is one passionate advocate for high-speed rail. And he did, as the mayor of Fresno told me when I told her, wow, that guy really likes high-speed rail. She good, he didn't used to be like that. And I think that time will be the last prong of how we overcome what is a brand new idea and project and way of moving about in California and in the United States. So thank you.